Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
a modern witch's spoken word grimoire,
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense,
your cauldron and your crystals,
and join us
as we get
Back on the Broomstick.
Hi, and welcome to Back on the Broomstick. On this episode, we'll be talking about witches' familiars. Are they spirits? Is it your cat? Can your goldfish be a familiar? We'll discuss their history, how they're thought of in today's witchcraft and pagan societies, and how you can get yourself a familiar.
And actually, we're also going to answer a listener question that we received about familiars.
And ready to dive into this furriest of episodes, I'm Layla.
And a happy familiar lover, I'm Chelle. I think we should start with what familiars are, because I think there's a misconception. And so why don't we talk about the definition of a familiar, or maybe better yet, what a familiar is versus what a familiar is not.
Ooh, I love that, because they really are different now than they ever have been historically. Much like a lot of words, things change over time. And in witchcraft, as we use things more often or stop using things, words change. So a familiar is actually referring to a familiar spirit. In European history, in Scottish history, they're typically a spirit that would come to a witch. And it was either given to her, inherited by her from another more powerful witch, or sometimes they'll show up when you need them most and become attached to you. But it's a spirit. It's not usually an animal. Like, think more Lasher in the Mayfair Witches and less Salem from Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I like that analogy. I do.
Yeah, so a familiar spirit is actually, in history, was a spirit. You can find reference to it in the Bible that's more satanic. Typically, like, they're smaller demons. You can find references in ancient Egypt, in Scottish lore, and they're all some type of spirit, whether it's something that you've called to you or summoned, like a demon with a contract, or if it's something that was maybe passed down to you from another witch or from a family member that will help you. And it's a spirit that's meant to assist you in your magical workings, either by providing energy, doing errands, casting small spells for you. And in particular, they're meant to protect you from magical attacks.
Okay, now I need to take a left turn here because, I'm good for that. So speaking of Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, and her familiar, I also had a cat for about 20 years that had a name, Salem. Remember Salem?
I do. Beautiful Salem.
Kitty cat.
He was kind of a shit. Not to you, though.
And that's the road I'm going down. I did feel like Salem was kind of a familiar, because I do feel like there was that magicalness about him. And I mean, you knew him the whole 20 years. Didn't you kind of see that?
Yeah.
But as you know, Salem did have that demon aspect. Like, remember, he'd run behind us and put his claws and teeth in the back of your thigh when you'd walk away. He did have that demon side. But generally, I am not a fan of people thinking their pet is their familiar, despite the fact that I feel like I had a cat that was kind of like a familiar.
Yeah, he definitely wasn't an ordinary cat. By describing the historical familiar, I don't want to discredit your magical familiar in Salem at all, but he also was not the historical definition of a familiar. He was not a spirit of some type that you had called in and then he shapeshifted into a cat form. Your Salem was more what I like to call the modern version of familiar, which is more kind of an animal, usually a pet, that has a magical affinity and tends to show up and help you when you're doing your magical works and may even lend their own power to those workings. But they're not the traditional sense of a spirit. What they are is the modern type of familiar, which is more what I would call like an animal helper or a magical companion. That's more of the contemporary version of what we mean by familiar.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree.
Like, you can't really go to the pet store, the shelter, or whatever.
Hey, you got a familiar there I can get?
Yeah, give me a familiar. Or, your friend's like, hey, I've got kittens. You want to adopt one? I mean, that could be a magical familiar, but usually this is a bond where you discover that, hey, whenever I read tarot cards, this cat comes over and sits next to me and purrs. Or whenever I'm at my altar, my dog's right there paying attention, almost like he's watching. You know, you can start to feel this energy between you and your companion. And that's when witches will typically start to call their pet a familiar. And what they really mean, I think, is magical friend, magical assistant.
Like a magical partner.
Magical partner, absolutely. And I do believe, as an animist, I do believe that all of us have souls and spirits. Animals, trees, birds, butterflies, everything has a soul and a spirit. And that energy can choose to work with you magically. It's not technically what historically would have been called a familiar spirit, but it is what is a modern day familiar or magical friend, magical assistant. And it's someone that you have some type of energetic bond with, whether it's your dog, your gecko, your goldfish, whatever, you can still have a magical bond with that creature.
But in history, that wasn't necessarily the definition of a familiar.
Right. A familiar was a spirit that you called to you.
But it did come in quote unquote animal form.
Rarely, actually.
I've seen it like an animal type or maybe a combination of animals.
But they only take that form to perform a task. It's a spirit and it'll take the form of an animal to go cause a problem or to go create mischief or to disguise itself. Like I think even in Sabrina the Teenage Witch, she calls a familiar and it comes to her more as like a demon or a goblin or an imp of some sort. And then it turns into a cat and stays the cat. Most of the time in history, your familiar is just a spirit and it will shapeshift into an animal. Or if it's a demon or an imp, a lot of times they'll take the form of an animal in order to
carry out their deed.
Yeah, to do their dirty work. That's not how they stay. They don't stay in that form.
I feel like I saw that on a Star Trek episode once, but
you'll see it in movies and things like that. Like even in Shakespeare, like Macbeth. The three witches, they have familiars and they're spirits that are in animal form. In particular, it's an owl called Harpier, a toad called Paddock, and a cat named Grimalkin. But I believe those were demons that had taken animal form. So it does happen. Like the Sabrina type familiar is more of a modernization.
Now, let me ask you this. Let's say you have a familiar. Is this like a one-on-one relationship? Or is like you're familiar hopping around town having relationships with other people? Like, I can't think of the right word to say it, but like, is this like a you belong to me, I belong to you? Or you know what I'm trying to get at?
That really depends on what type of entity and what type of contract you have. If, say, you're going the Sabrina route and you're just calling out for a familiar or for a magical companion, the very next day, a cat could show up for you. You know, the cat distribution system will deliver a beautiful little cat to your door.
But that doesn't mean it's bonded to you for life, though, right?
Right. That just means it's more than likely going to be your animal companion. You'll see signs about it that'll lead you to a shelter or something, and you'll find your friend there. But that's not really a contract. You could ask for an actual spirit and do some high magic and ask for a spirit to come. And in that case, depending on the type of spirit, there's usually a contract involved in that. And no, they're not typically bouncing around, you know, doing things for other people. That's typically yours. You know, your familiar, the spirit that has come to you and is working with you specifically.
Now, you've mentioned the phrase contract a few times. So I want to just real quick, we did get what kind of sparked this episode is we did get a listener question. And this would be a good time for the question. Are familiars summoned like demons? And do you form a contract with them? Or are they like spirit guides and they come to you when you need them most?
I think we answered that yes to both of those. And the answer is definitely yes to both of those.
What's the deal with this contract? So talk to me about contracts.
Like the contract thing is more, that's not really my area. I'm an animist witch. I think everything's got free will, and I would just ask them if they want to work with me. But depending on the type of magic you do, you could do some high magic. You could get into Kabbalah or get into some type of old biblical magic. And those are contracts. You are usually working with demons or that type of energy. And that does involve you setting the terms of the relationship. This is what I expect from you, and this is what I will give you.
And be specific, folks, because when you're not specific, be careful what you wish for because you just might get it.
That's right. That's not necessarily something that I do or necessarily believe in, but other people do, and that's their bag, and that's cool. While I do believe that there are spirits and entities that you could call to work with you, like Chelle said, tricky, be specific, cross your T's, dot your
It's like
I's.
working with fairies, man.
Exactly. And different types of fairies, depending on what you're working with, depending on what type of energy you're talking to be your familiar. Okay, let's talk about in European folklore. A lot of times they talk about like brownies in your house
Right.
or land wights. And we're getting into a little bit of like genus loci, but those were also familiars that people had. They were creatures that people would talk to. Like the stories of like the brownies that would help the cobbler make his shoes, right?
Right,
Or
right.
that would come in and help the homemaker clean her house and take care of things. And in return, they were given food or they were given little clothes. And it was a mutual relationship. You can form mutual relationships with these spirits and have them be your guides or your guardian spirits.
But it does have to be mutual. It has to be a give and take. Be very careful of taking without giving because there are consequences. Again, treat it like you're dealing with fairies, man.
We should definitely do a fairy episode coming up because I know people have and there's a lot of overlap in these, the genus loci, the familiar spirits and the fae,
Right.
that type of thing. There's a lot of overlap here.
I think in modern day, people more look at familiars as like animals that they have connections with, more so than fairy type spirits or brownie type spirits. I think it's more in modern times in the context of more so cats or owls or other types of birds, things like that. You know what I mean?
People love to call their pets their familiars, and sometimes your pet will be your magical companion. I've had a cat that loved to be around when I would read tarot. She wanted to touch the cards. She wanted to be near the cards all the time. And I felt like I got, a little bit clearer reading sometimes when she was around. So it can definitely be your pet, but also I like how you mentioned birds, owls. You're probably not going to have an owl as a pet.
Well, no, but I'm just saying.
But the thing is like sometimes you will see signs that say that owls or foxes or crows or some type of wild animal that you can't have as a pet is a guardian spirit.
Well, like always be outside your house or what
Yeah,
have
you'll constantly turn on the news and there's owl stories. You keep seeing owl references whenever you go anywhere. And you know that it's not just coincidence, it's meant for you in some way. That can be owl spirit reaching out to you. That can be that energy of that creature that wants to give you a lesson or be a magical assistant to you in some way. Maybe every time you go to your ancestor altar, crows come out your window or something, and
right.
so you'll know, and you'll know that feeling. It's different than, oh, hey, I see crows on my way to work every day because that's where they eat. It's a different feeling than that when it's a magical sign for you. And I've heard in familiar lore, there's a couple different ways to get a familiar spirit. And one of them is in time of need. I know you've had a lot of cats show up to you when you needed a little comfort.
I have.
And, it happens sometimes that they just show up when you need them, but sometimes you can call them. And an interesting piece of familiar lore is some people believe that familiar spirits, like the ancient folklore type of familiar spirit, has to be passed down from witch to witch. And it's even said that a witch can't pass on until she gives her familiar spirit to someone to inherit. And only then can she cross the veil.
It is kind of funny how you say that if one goes, one just seems to show up because, as you recall, my Salem kitty was a familiar like cat. And after he parted this world, we were pretty devastated. I didn't realize how devastated I would be until I was that devastated.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very adamant I was not going to get another cat. I'm done. I've had a cat for 20 years. This was too painful. Over it. And I just had one fall at my door And here we are. I don't think this cat is a familiar type cat, but just the fact that almost like the universe knew I needed that space filled, even though it might not
Hmm.
be magically filled. Because you know my current cat, he is anything but a familiar. But
Right.
but almost like the universe tried to fill part of that hole. You know what I mean?
But I do think that magical pets, magical friends do happen. I've seen too many people and I've heard too many stories of people having assistance from their animals. There's even, I can't think of her name right now, but there's a psychic that has snakes and she gets actual messages from across the veil from her snakes as
Ah,
she's doing readings. And that's another really great benefit of having a familiar that's the modern usage of familiar, I guess, a pet that's your magical companion, because they do have a better sense of magical energies. They can see ghosts, spirits, and energy centers better than we can.
oh, absolutely.
So having them around can really assist you in your working. So they might not be an actual familiar spirit take an animal form. They're just an animal, but it's an animal with an energy that's uniquely tuned to magic or to you in some way. And I think there's a lot of magic in that itself.
I always used to say you get a dog to let you know when people are invading your home, and you get a cat to let you know when people are invading your magical sphere.
Yeah, really, for real.
No,
Some cat lore that I learned when I was a little kid is that if a cat is staring intently at absolutely nothing,
yes, it is.
if you can get behind them and look between their ears, you can see into the spirit world. So you'll see whatever ghost or fairy they're looking at if you can look directly between their ears from behind them. I was never able to get a cat to sit still long enough to test that theory, but I'm still pretty sure it's true.
When Salem used to hiss at a blank wall, I was like, all right, something is up, and my cat needs to handle this.
Oh, yeah, cats can definitely see ghosts and fairies and spirits.
Cats and babies, man, cats and babies.
I think because they're so close to being across that veil, anyways, they regularly slink in and out of it all the time.
When my grandson was an infant, when the baby and the cat would stare at the corner of the ceiling, I'd be like, oh man, what's on? Come on,
Time to break out the pine and the moon water, man.
right? Would you advise people to maybe seek out a familiar, or do you think it is a proceed with caution?
That's a loaded question. I would advise people not to try and make your pet your familiar. That's what I would advise because
Good answer.
one of the things that your familiar is supposed to do, one of the traditional things, is they absorb negative energy that is being sent at you. If
Right.
there is any type of magical attack, your familiar is directly in front of you, ready to bear the brunt of that
And your
negative
pet may not
energy.
be able to handle that.
Exactly. You don't want to do that to Fido or to little Fifi. You don't want
That
to hurt
goldfish
them.
is delicate, man.
That's right. That's right. Your little ferret gets scared of loud noises. You don't want to have them being directly there if somebody's shooting the evil eye your way because they're going to take the brunt of it.
But if you have a long-haired black cat, then you get that cat on the case, man, because that cat will tear shit up.
I think if you are lucky enough to become the friend of a magical companion, then I think that's awesome. If you would like to call one into your life, you can do that too. These types of spells are super easy.
But as with anything in life, proceed with caution when you are getting into a contract.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend getting into a contract with a familiar spirit. I think it's probably nicer to work with the spirits of the land where you're at. Check with your house, see if there's any household spirits that want to work with you. Kind of like the Sabrina witch, where she asked for a familiar and then it turned into a cat. If you work with a familiar spirit, you can place a beautiful statue or something on your altar, a pretty shell or something that reminds you of that energy and ask if that's an acceptable home for that spirit.
Right.
And sometimes they'll say yes, and you can have that energy and meditate and work with that energy at any time on your altar. And you could create a separate space for it if you want to. I know some people that work with spirits that put them into deity statues, although deities are never familiars.
Oh, no, 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 no,
No, no,
no.
no, don't even ask. Rude. But they'll put them in statues or they'll put them in skulls or, like the crystal skulls or the resin skulls. I'm not talking real skulls, although you
Right.
could. But they'll put them in an object to put on their altar and work with the energy that way. And that can be a fabulous way to get the benefits without having to scoop litter.
And actually, one thing that I have done is before Salem had passed away, we had got some clippings of his fur because he was a super ass long hair. And I actually have like like a sachet bag that I keep those fur clippings, and I have that on my altar.
And if you have a pet that you think is your magical companion, you could certainly do rituals to thank them or to bless them. You could meditate and call their energy into that meditation and see if they will talk to you or if they'll have some type of message for you in a meditative state. But if you would like to call one into your life, doing any type of calling spell, and if you're asking for a cat, use a little catnip. If you're going to get a rat, use a little cheese, that type of thing. But tailor the spell, whatever the calling is, put a few things to actually lure what type of creature you're looking to be your magical companion into the spell. It doesn't have to be anything harder than saying, I wish for a magical companion that's also a gorgeous, long-haired Maine Coon.
I'm there, done that, got it.
You just ask for it. Just ask for the universe to bring you what you want. More than likely, if you've ever heard of the cat distribution system, it does not fail to deliver.
But it doesn't have to be a cat.
Any type of animal can be a magical companion or a familiar. So yeah, if you're going to get into a contract with a spirit or a demon, that's a different podcast. If you're going to ask for a magical friend or a magical assistant to come be part of your life, you can just ask for that energy and have it put into an inanimate object. Or you can ask for it to come in four-legged, finned, furred, scaled, whatever. Just make sure that you're ready to take care of it in both the mundane and the magical sense.
Absolutely. Especially with cats. Like I said, I had Salem 20 years. I mean, this is a commitment. This isn't just, use it for your magical working and then off with you. As with any pet, you need to take responsibility. That's my PSA. Call me Bob Barker.
Have your familiar spayed or neutered.
Right, but make sure you know what you're getting into. It's kind of like buying the puppy at Christmas and then wanting to get rid of it by Valentine's Day. If you call a familiar in, make sure you're prepared to be responsible and be a responsible pet owner.
Alternately, if you call a spiritual familiar in, make sure you're prepared and you're going to be responsible.
To be a spiritual pet owner.
That's right. It's a contract. Historically, they used to, and I think a lot of this is just, bull crap that was used to kind of subjugate women for the most part. But they used to say that the things witches would do to take care of their familiars were, do you remember at the witch trials, they would look for like an extra nipple or a witch's mole?
Oh my God, yeah.
They would say that was how the witch would feed her familiar blood.
Suck from the teat.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to be doing that.
Can I tell you, if my cat ever tried doing that, I would have thrown it across the room. Now, you animal lovers, please don't bombard me with hateful comments. But if a cat was trying to gnaw on my damn nipple, okay, you've crossed the line and we're done here.
Yeah, that's definitely a line.
Who would have thought that would have been okay?
I think some of this hysteria even went so far as to, in Scotland and in Europe back in the day, I think if you even had a small animal in your house, you could be called a witch. Like if someone saw a mouse or a rat or even a cat in your house, they would use that to say that you were a witch. So pretty scary stuff. It's surprising that we all have so many cats now and so many pets.
Right. Well, I think we have covered as best we can in an episode the ins and outs of familiars. So if there's something you want to hear about, something that you want us to talk about, shoot us a message. Get us on Instagram, Facebook. Email us at backonthebroomstick@gmail.com. But if there's something you want to know, hey, let us know. We'll see if we can get to it.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we hope you'll be back next week on Friday for another episode of Back on the Broomstick. So in the meantime, stay wise, stay wicked,
And keep it witchy.